Welcome back to Media Convention Day 2. Morning, how are you? Yeah. My name is Joe. I'm happy to be your host of this session today. It's going to be good, I guess. If you need any translations, you can get a device over there. We have a simultaneous translation over there into German if you need a German translation. It's all about the battle of the views this morning, and in a turbulent state of global affairs, after the crisis is always before the crisis, and what people need today is reliable information, and they want it fast. And also, they want background. And if you're lucky as a news channel network, you have three of it. So you're reliable, you're first, and you have the background. The question is, how do you get lucky? So what can we do to deal with those crises? What is journalism these days, and how do they, what's the difference between all the news channel networks? I'd like to introduce to you the senior political correspondent of Russia today. He is Oksana Boyko. This one. And also we have the editor and programming director of CNN Digital International, Inga Torda. This one. Yeah. And the director general of Deutsche Welle, Peter Limburg, is here. And also the director of news at Al Jazeera English, Salah Negm. Welcome. Over there. Maybe like this so we can see you. So actually, the interesting thing was when I was preparing this session yesterday and I was talking to people, they all were like, oh, that's going to be tricky. We have, so talking about cliches, we have the Russian propaganda team here from Putin. We have the propaganda team from the imperialistic United States. And we have the fundamentalist propaganda team from Al Jazeera. That's what they say. And then they say Deutsche Welle.
No, come on. What? No, I'm
they
waiting.
said I've never heard of it.
Okay.
You're brutal already.
Okay, he chose the soft start.
Yeah, that was a soft start. I mean, talking about cliches, how important, Peter, is dealing with cliches at your actual work, at your everyday work?
I mean, normally cliches you like to avoid in journalistic work, but you're never totally free of them. I mean, your audience has cliché in their minds, and sometimes journalists have them also, but normally we try to avoid playing with clichés, especially when you like to inform people about Germany or the international politics, then you shouldn't play too much with clichés because it doesn't really help to bring people together. If you start clichés journalism, you separate and you won't bring people together.
You always confronted with the cliché. Some say it's real that you're a part of the Russian propaganda. How do you deal with it?
Well, we deal with it in a, I guess, humorous manner. You just said, Peter, that we all have to avoid cliches. I think cliches is the main thing how journalism is done these days, because from the very beginning, I mean, whatever issue you take, international issue, it is conveyed in terms of cliches. Rebels versus tyranny in Syria, good versus bad in terms of Russia, authoritarianism versus democracy in Ukraine. So all the international coverage at the end of the day is built on cliches, and some of that is necessitated by profession itself, because television is a medium that doesn't give you that much time to get into details, into context. So you have to convey very, very complex issues in a 3-minute package. You cannot possibly do that without cliches. I think recognizing it is very important, and you asked about propaganda. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, and that's an interesting start to our discussion, the battle for the worldviews, or all of the worldviews, will be decreased in terms of the casualties only when we all recognize that we all bring to our coverage our worldviews. This is the starting point of the coverage, not the sort of this high moral platform of being unbiased. This is unrealistic. This is simply unrealistic. If you bypass yourself if you say that, I'm the network that is presenting objective coverage. If that's your starting point, I would accuse you of propaganda first. And I don't see any big trouble with the word propaganda, because I think that is recognizing of the limits of your own coverage. And if you start at that point, then you're honest with your audience. If you accuse somebody else of propaganda, that means that you're telling, look, those guys are telling propaganda, but I'm telling you the truth. That is the biggest sin in journalism, in my book at least.
Do you agree, Inga? Do you think you can't get rid of cliches doing your journalistic work?
Yeah, I don't completely agree with that, actually. And I think that the organizations that go beyond the cliches are the ones that are going to survive in the new world. So I think, we need to start. I mean, the world is a very complex place at the moment. I mean, I think Oksana sort of pointed on it. I mean, there's this, the war in Syria, the war on terror is a good versus evil, this democracy versus authoritarianism. And I think, now more than ever, journalism is incredibly important to get away from these cliches, to explain what's going on, give people the kind of information they need to make up their own mind, and not sort of patronize the audience by saying, we know everything, therefore we're going to give you your view. It's more like, let's put this into context, let's give you the facts about what's going on, let's give you kind of the analysis that you need to kind of make up your own mind. And I think that, that's the kind of route that journalism should, and I think in many ways is going down. And we are moving very much away from the 3-minute package format on television. We're moving towards having 2 or 3 big stories of the day and giving them time to breathe, allowing the interviews to run a little bit longer, bringing in more experts, bringing in more views, and I don't think it's always necessary about, having 50% of that view and 50% of that view. It's more about putting it all into a proper context. So giving stories that need it and should have it more time on our platforms, I think is what we're, where journalists should be headed. And I mean, we don't have to cover every single small stories that happen in the world, but tackling the big ones right now and getting away from the cliches, I think is where we should be headed.
So for young journalists, I guess it's kind of depressing to hear what you just said, that it's impossible to get rid of. Impossible to get rid of cliches and not to be objective. And I'd like to ask you, Sala.
I just want to add that I also consider myself to be a young journalist. For the record.
No, I mean like the talents who's listening here. Sala, do you try? Do you still try to be objective?
I think the most important thing is your starting point, and this is in your editorial policy and principles, and this is accuracy and objectivity. You will not achieve that all the time, but you have to be aware of the biases with your reporting and try to correct it all the time and play the devil's advocate with yourself. Questions, is that correct? Is that biased? Is that true? Until you reach the closest thing to objective reporting. That's what we aspire for, and that's what we need to work for all the time.
Do you think for a viewer, it's impossible to get the objective kind of view on crisis with only watching just one news channel? Do we all have to get all the news? What's your strategy for listeners and viewers?
Who are you asking?
Say, yeah.
I think it is absolutely impossible to form your picture of the world by watching one channel or one network. I think that is perhaps a crime that you can commit against yourself, against democracy, against the well-being of humanity, for that matter. And I think that, to me, I mean, we already started, before this panel, we started a discussion about what journalism is. And, I also used to be a very inspiring young journalist. I studied in the United States. I learned English from scratch all by myself to get the American scholarship to study journalism there. And here I am working for the Kremlin propaganda bullhorn and using all the tools that I studied, I got in the United States, for that matter. I hope you understand I'm joking a little bit here, but going back to your original point, I think it is impossible. It is impossible to form an objective picture of reality from watching one channel, because there is no objective picture of reality. I'll give you one example, Libya. I mean, this is a country where I spent a lot of time, especially during the beginning of the revolution, and all the channels, most of the Western channels and Eastern channels as well, portray that in terms of those great young people taking to the streets wanting democracy. And there was this significant group of people in Benghazi who wanted democracy. But at the same point of time, there were lots of people who raided government companies. All the pickup trucks that you see in Libya reporting, they were all stolen from state-controlled companies. All the weapons that they got, those were from weapon depots that were also raided. There were people that were being lynched on the streets in Benghazi at night during those very same demonstrations that Al Jazeera gave enormous coverage to, very positive one. CNN covered extensively, and none of them looked at those unpleasant sides. And maybe, I wouldn't suggest that that was because of some conspiracy, Western conspiracy. Perhaps they just didn't want to see that, or perhaps they simply didn't see that. And that's why it is important to have channels like RT, channels like Press TV, CCTV, and others who may come to it with different geopolitical interests, and that's why they would be motivated to look into unpleasant sides of the story, the sides of the story that is not perhaps always convenient or pleasant to see.
I think I have to interrupt. You mentioned Libya. In Libya, one of Al Jazeera cameramen was shot dead.
Yeah, I know that.
Wait a minute.
I was there when it happened.
No, please. We reported the lynching, we reported the raiding of government houses, but there was a revolution going on. And you cannot take it from one side. To be objective, you have to report all sides as much as you can. We have been in Tripoli with the government, doing interviews with Gaddafi and his son as we were covering the uprising in Benghazi. And if we don't do that, then we are not aspiring or being close to be objective. You cannot say that one channel is doing that and one channel is doing that. And I want to pinpoint something. There is a trust building between a media outlet and the audience. Audience trusts certain networks. They don't like it maybe because they go to like the networks or the channels that gives them a view that they like or that they are biased to. But they trust even the channels that they don't like and they go to. People go to the BBC because they trust BBC News. People go to Al Jazeera because they trust Al Jazeera News. They go to CNN because they trust it. Do they like them all? No, they don't. Some of them will like Al Jazeera more, some of them will like CNN more or BBC more. And we are aspiring always to report both sides, not one side.
Talking about trust.
You started this question by asking about, can we get one side? But
are you biased at all?
No, we believe that, I would totally take Saleh's view here that, it's about your audience doesn't trust you unless you're transparent about where you come from. If you're not transparent, then it does become propaganda. But if you say we come from this point of view, and I live in Britain, and the press in Britain is notorious for coming out on one side or the other in general election and anything. I don't see anything wrong with that as long as you're transparent about it. But I would like to make one point that I think is really important in this conversation that we're having is that journalism is becoming very dangerous now. And, sending your people into areas that need reporting from, like Syria, like Libya, is increasingly dangerous. And I think that that's hampering reporting from these areas. So organizations that might have sort of more vested interest in these countries find access to those areas easier. And they might be reporting from one side or the other, going on embeds with the Syrian army or the Russian army or in Syria, for example. It is going to restrict what you can do. So I think that we have to recognize and be open about the fact that reporting from these areas is difficult. It is normally kind of very, very dangerous. And from my point of view, reading the report recently about press freedom and how that's going down was a very depressing read. And we need to recognize that those things
I would agree with you, but I think we have to recognize that when you're embedded with some rebel groups, your ability to report objectively on the conflict is also limited. When you're embedded with the American army in Iraq, it's the same. This is how the conflict have been covered, not just in the last couple of years. It's been how it's been covered for decades at least.
You have to try to see both sides of the story, Peter. Let me ask you a question. If you hire a person, a well-educated journalist, will he cover news in a different way when he's working with you or with Russia Today?
I'm not quite sure whether we would hire the same persons, but probably if we take it from, if we find an ideal journalist, I think he would change probably not his opinion. But the concept between Russia today and ours is very much different. So I would agree that obviously you have to watch a lot of international news channels to get the whole picture, yes. But the concept is different. Oksana said it's fine with propaganda, Oksana said it's fine with cliches. Well, she has, or RT has one mission, and the mission is to transport the Russian view into the world. Our mission is different. Our mission is to have an approach that every opinion has its place, that we bring people together. And so we transport different opinions also from Germany. I mean, we have the opposition in our program, we have also the government. In Russia, I would say it's a quite different approach. So I haven't had any big interview seen from Mr. Kasparov on RT. I haven't seen voices from the opposition in RT. You don't transport these voices.
Well,
so this is maybe just the difference. It's okay, it's fine. It's your concept, but we can't compare things which are very different. This is what I'd like to say. So coming back to your question, I hope that the journalists working with us, when they change to RT, would have the same freedom of speech that they have with us.
So why do we need, for example, a German network, an international network? Why do we need it? Why shouldn't people just watch CNN or Russia Today or Al Jazeera or whatever?
Well, if you want to have a continental European view, I mean, you have CNN, BBC, which is an Anglo-American view of the world, you have the Russians, and you have Al Jazeera, which is coming from the Arab world, and you have CCTV, but you don't have really strong continental European outlets in the international discussion. And as I would say that Germany is for the moment quite an interesting country. Germany is demanded not only by its products, but also by its politics. I mean, Chancellor Merkel is quite known in the world, and whether she does something right or she does something bad, we transport it. And I think there is an interest in Germany, and we would like to be the first source when it comes to Germany. It's fine when you have the BBC or CNN explaining what's happening in Germany, but I think to really understand it, you might better go to the original source coming from Germany.
Salah, do you care about what German news channels do? Do you watch them?
Of course.
Yeah.
Not only German news channels, we watch a lot of European and African news channels. It's important. I'll go back to your question about why do we need CNN, BBC, or Al Jazeera, or Russia Today. I think for the viewer, first, they know your editorial principles, and if your principles are reporting accurately and honestly, and then you try to be objective, and they build a kind of trust. But each network has got an area of speciality. For example, you go to Al Jazeera because you know that you'll get extensive coverage of the Arab world and Islamic world, and then international as well in Asia English. You go to the BBC because you'll find a certain speciality in documentaries, investigative, or whatever. CNN in their talk shows and discussion programs. So all of them, they fulfill a need in the market with the same editorial principles. I think in this day, it's International Press Freedom Day. We should not talk about competition between these big international networks. We need to talk about solidarity. And I'll go back to the safety of journalists now. In order to bring to the viewer the real accurate news from the ground, we have to work on protecting the journalists and allowing access to different places. I don't need to give concessions to the Syrian government in order to report from Damascus. I don't need to give concessions to Iraq. Our offices were closed in Iraq just a couple of days ago because we were reporting about the opposition, about the fighting, and about the government as well. And the government wants a certain point of view only on television. So this is solidarity that we need between us to protect the journalists and to guarantee access and freedom of information from different places. But even with these restrictions, it's not going to deter real international journalism from covering news. For example, in Zimbabwe, BBC have been covering and entering the country, although they are banned from there. We reported Myanmar, and we entered the border Maybe people will say illegally, but you need to get the story when there was a dictatorship at that time. We have been having journalists imprisoned in Egypt for the same reason, but are we going to stop reporting what's happening in Egypt? Not really. We have to continue trying, and we have to have solidarity between all these channels in order to get free access and ability to obtain information for empowering the viewer. That's the ultimate goal there.
I'd like to discuss this point a little later on. For now, I would like to invite you to watch a little film about the news of April 21st, I guess. For some reasons, we don't have material from Al Jazeera, but we have Russia Today, we have CNN and Deutsche Welle. So it's one news day, the news of 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and watch it. Now we can see what's changing. Pretty short.
Thanks for covering Merkel.
Yeah, well, apparently, we covered Germany more extensively than German channel itself.
What we actually didn't see was the piece about Merkel after that. It was around about 8-minute piece, quite critical about the politics of Chancellor Merkel.
And I'm sure perhaps Deutsche Welle wouldn't run it either, right?
But the first question is, why did CNN on this day only deliver soft news? I mean, Sepp Blatter and the Queen, but there's medals going on, as we saw.
Refugees.
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think finding, tons of illegal drugs in a tunnel is soft news. Secondly, Blatter was a big gap for us. It was his sort of first big media interviews that he gave, and there was only us and 2 other networks, as far as I know, that got the interview with him. So we were distinguishing ourselves from others who did not have that kind of content that we have. The Queen, well, I think it's important sometimes to move away from, I mean, I'm pretty sure if you'd watched that half-an-hour bulletin, you would have got the migrants, the Merkels, the Syrians, and everything. But, this is the longest reigning monarch, bar one, I believe, in the world, and certainly the most famous one, and probably one of the most famous people on the planet, So I think we had a good access to what was happening there, and we could give our audience something different. So I think that, having a little bit of light and shade is never a bad thing.
So it's a matter of fact, it's the agendas are very, very different on this day, on this specific day. Is that good news or bad news that everyone's so different?
No, it's good news because, we like to enrich the world with our programs and not be boring with doing the same stuff than the others do. So I think it's very important to get in this kind of environment where you have the digital world, which we haven't talked about yet, and we have such a large competition between digital outlets and classical media and whatever, and between the networks, to have exclusive stories and to have something which is enriching. So I think this was now just a short view, and I think we all have covering hard news and soft news, but I think you're well advised to find the special stories the others don't have. This is a classical journalism thing, and I think we're trying to do this.
Let's give us a little shot in your inside editor room. So how do you decide what news is news on a specific day? Is there any criteria you can tell us where you say, yeah, Russia Today tries to be like this, or we try to be different than CNA in this way? Is there anything? What you're talking about?
Well, I think one of the sort of organizing principles, and I think this clip wasn't very representative. I will give you another example. I arrived yesterday in Berlin, and I had some time to watch TV, which I normally don't have as a viewer. And I first watched CNN, and there was a story, like there was something about Syria. Then there was a story about the first cruise ship setting off for Cuba. I switched to, which is understandable for CNN. I mean, it's ultimately an American network, so that is something of an interest for your audience. Then I switched to BBC. There was the same package. Then I switched to France 24, and there was the same package, 5 minutes given to some cruise ship setting for Cuba. And you have to ask whether really, that's such an important story for the French audience or for the French journalists to broadcast. And my point is that I don't think that the news agenda is so diverse on any given day. I think there is a certain degree of convergence and sort of agenda setting effect, especially among sort of Western media, and I'm being very broad here and generalizing perhaps too much, but I think that effect is very present, and that effect gets amplified when you have a war or a major critical geopolitical event, and this is something that almost immediately shapes the broader sort of cliched coverage of it. So for example, again, coming back to the Libyan thing or the Syrian thing, even before sending reporters on the ground, networks would frame their opinion of what is actually happening. So whether it is, let's say, people fighting for democracy against the totalitarian government, and you would hear that on CNN, and that would immediately get picked up in many of the Western media. I don't think it's conspiracy. I think it's really cultural in-group thinking. It's perhaps subliminal thing that's going on. And
is it a bad thing? I mean,
it is a bad thing only if you have like-minded media. If you have CNN, Al Jazeera, which I think recently has been more. Al Jazeera coverage has changed a little bit in terms of being more pro-American, I think, in the last couple of years. But that, my point is that we were talking about being objective and trying to represent all sides of the story. I think this is the job that used to be done by journalists. I think now it is the job that has to be done by audience. You cannot outsource it to journalists anymore. You have to do it yourself. You have to watch Deutsche Welle, you have to watch CNN, you have to watch Al Jazeera, you have to watch Russia Today, and then you sit down and you decide what is actually going on. Because when journalists and networks are coming from very different cultural experience, from very different historical experience, from very different geopolitical interests, only then you can figure out what is really going on, because they would be, consciously or not, focusing on different sides of the story. So coming back, I'm sorry for this very long-winded answer, coming back to your original point, I think any network has stories that it pays more attention to. For Russia, it's Ukraine, Syria, what's happening in the Middle East, Iran, China, and so on. So those are the issues that we would follow on a continuous basis, and this is something that our viewers would be exposed to. The same with CNN. I think you have more interests in other types of stories, and for example, FIFA scandal also has some geopolitical and political aspects to it. And you know, the same for Al Jazeera, you can call it bias or you can call it a natural interest to Arab or Muslim events, and your own perception, your own historical experience will shape inevitably how you are going to bring those stories to your audience, whether you like it or not. And I'm just ending up by reinforcing that you cannot trust journalists anymore to do that job for you. The audience cannot do that because everybody is biased, and that is.
So sorry to interrupt you. You cannot trust journalism anymore, and this is wow. I mean, for a lot of people, they actually don't have the time to watch all the networks. They don't have the time to read different newspapers from all over the world. So they need and they're seeking for reliable journalism in some way. So in some way, I think you guys have to deliver this, and I think it's
I absolutely. I mean, I don't think that is absolutely right at all. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think journalism can be trusted. I really do, and I think that there are some, exceptionally good journalists who go out there and tell the stories the way they are, who analyze it in the way it is, and these, journalists are working for different organizations. I mean, we have some within CNN who focus on issues that are really important. Same at the BBC, at any of the newspapers. I mean, nobody's going to accuse these people of not doing their jobs. And I think, as I said before, more than ever, journalism right now is important, and the kind of the skills that a good journalist brings to that profession, to me right now, is fundamentally important to explain the world. And I don't think the audience, we shouldn't give them kind of things and say, sort this out yourself. We should be kind of trying to contextualize it for them, for it to make sense to them and see how it's relevant to them. And trust is absolutely at the heart of that. I totally agree with Helen, that's absolutely at the heart of that. And I fundamentally disagree that all journalists cannot be trusted. I fundamentally disagree with that.
Let me say something.
sorry, Peter was the first, sorry.
Please.
Really, I agree with you, because the sentence, you can't trust journalists anymore, is the end of press freedom. It's welcome to the world of PR, welcome to the world of propaganda, welcome to the world of conspiracy theory by user-generated content. And I would really ask you to reconsider this sentence, because you would, if you say you can't trust journalists anymore, then you can't trust journalists of RT anymore.
This is not what I said. I said
you just said it. It's a quote. Excuse me.
This is a very important
I was a
distinction.
journalist myself, and I can't remember a quote.
There is a very important distinction between a journalist and a network. We are discussing networks. Obviously, there are lots of good journalists who are trying to do their job, but this is no single journalist is broadcasting his material all 24 hours straight. So we are talking about networks, and sure, every individual journalist tries to do his job or her job to the best of his ability, but you cannot trust the network to deliver all you need to know about every single event, because that network, and that was my original point, that network starts from a certain editorial point, from a certain cultural experience, and from a certain geopolitical agenda, whether you like it or not.
Just to make that clear, so you're saying, for example, you can't trust Russia today?
I think you have to be critical and skeptical of everything that you watch, because am I biased? Absolutely. I have my certain opinions, very strong ones, on what was happening around the Middle East and how the networks contributed to the bloodshed and carnage that we are seeing there. Children being killed, 9-year-old girls being raped and sold. That is actually the result of the trust. The result of the trust, because many networks were portraying what was happening in those countries as a democratic uprising. Is it a democratic uprising anymore? Do journalists have a role in that? Absolutely they did. If you don't believe that I think is abdicating your own responsibility.
Sarah is waiting.
I don't go out there and ask the audience, trust me, I'm a journalist. Trust is earned, and it's earned by accurate reporting that's proven day on and day off. It's earned by showing different and variety of points of views. It's shown by reporting both sides of the story on a long-term basis. Trust is being earned. It's not that journalists are not to be trusted. We go to 260 million households, and I don't know how many viewers. We don't have a very accurate research about that, but there are millions of viewers. Why do they come to Al Jazeera? Why do they go to CNN? Because they earned their trust, because they reported accurately over 25 years, over 20 years, over a long period of time. When I come and say, don't trust me, it's actually betraying my mission. My mission is known. It's editorial principles. It's to be accurate. It's to be honest. It's to report what you see. And how do I choose the news? I choose the news as headlines. Everyone chooses its different agendas for sure. But is it relevant to the people? How many people does it affect? Does it change policies? Is there a change in the attitude? Is there drama in the news? And that sets my news agenda. And of course, we are individuals, so everyone will have a different measures or let's say evaluation to all these elements in which he chooses the headlines. But at the end, you trust media, you go to a certain media because it earned the trust from the audience. It's not something that happens over day, and it's not a blank check. And once you betray that trust, you lose it, and it's very difficult to bring it back.
You want to clap? Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you
I'll
like.
clap.
Whatever you like. Talking about trust is also connected to power. I mean, public power, broadcasting power, which means in terms of digital transformation and online first and all the stuff, that if you reach a broader audience because you have a very good digital strategy in social networks, on YouTube or whatever, you are in the position to reach more people and to reach more people and to try to reach more people and give them their trust they need, whatever. You have around about 1.7 million subscribers on YouTube, I guess.
I think it's around 3 billion.
3 million views?
Billion views.
Yes. But it's only 100,000 at Deutsche Welle. What do they do better than you?
Well, I think the figure you quoted was the figure with the English outlet,
Yes.
so it's fine. I think, first of all, RT is very successful in this. One has to really agree. But you know, distribution has something to do with money in every time. So when they can spend more money on this, it's fine. Then they will have more success. But also, the content is different, as we said. It's I think when you try to do balanced journalism, sometimes maybe it's a bit more difficult than when you have a clear, let's go for it, and this is how the world is opinion. But we have to say that on our digital mission, we are now trying to get also in the digital world. We had been maybe a bit late in the past years. But we're going, and for instance, we're quite happy when we look at our Arab channel with Shabab Talk, and they're very good on Facebook. They have millions of followers. It's really a good program. We saw with the success with the interview of Tim Sebastian on Conflict Zone with Frauke Petri. We shared more than 1 million viewers looked at this interview. So I think we're coming up. We will not be as soon as so successful as RT, but we're trying. And we saw the necessity to invest now much more into the digital world, yes.
You told us before that you're facing like reconstruction within your network about digitization. In terms of what we discussed before, how important is it to be, you know, on the platforms and to reach a proper audience?
I think it's fundamentally important to be where the audience is. And I mean, CNN started off as a news channel, but it's right. I mean, now it's sort of morphed into the kind of a modern news organization. And you know, so CNN now its mission is to be on all platforms where the people are at the time that they're there. So you know, we all know sort of consumption of people, mobiles coming up, you know, they watch that and they look at that in the morning, then they go on the desktop at lunchtime and during their work hours, back to mobiles, and then television normally still dominates in the evening. So I think that, you know, having a strategy that puts the sort of audience at the heart of it is led by sort of the data that we know about their consumption habit to make sure that we're delivering them on whatever screen, whatever platform they need is absolutely fundamental to survival. As is, you know, distinctive good journalism, you know, that you put on those platforms. And so, you know, for CNN, you know, we are, it's always been a disruptor. It was a disruptor when it started, back about 30 years ago. It is now kind of going from a position of strength to turn the company into a sort of a very digital-first minded thinking. And I mean, I think digital first is a sort of slogan that has been used a lot within organizations, but I think that we're showing in the kind of investment and restructuring that we're doing that we fundamentally are following where the audience is headed and going and hopefully leading the way on that. I do honestly believe that, you know, right now, any of those big organizations needs to be thinking around where the audience is and making sure that your relevant news is given to those audience at the relevant time.
Sala, if you consider the fact that a lot of people are only getting the news from social networks like Facebook, and we all know that Facebook is a biased algorithm as well, so people tend to get the news they're seeking for, and they're not getting the whole picture. How do you deal with that as a journalist?
Well, we follow the same strategy. We have to be on all platforms and reach the audience wherever they are. But at the same time, we understand that all platforms should be treated as complementary to each other. Everyone has function and has audience. Social media has an effect which is, we realize now, it's polarizing people. You narrow your view more and more, and you choose the friends and the video or content that you like. And you don't have the comprehensive look at the world. Television is different, and radio is different, because in a news bulletin or a news show, you get variety of news. And we watch the behavior of people. Yes, you get your news from Facebook, but once it's breaking news, you try to get Twitter as well, and if it's continuous, then most probably you'll go to streaming or television. So it's how to drive audience from one platform to another and make them complementary and give you the full picture. Once you go to a news show or to a website, then you'll not see only news, for example, for me, about Netherlands, and I only narrow my perspective to see European news, but I'll see news about the world. If I get only my news, as you say, from social media or applications, it will be very tailored to a narrow interest. And that's not what international news broadcasters are doing. We try to get viewers from one platform to the other, from one topic to the other, and give a comprehensive view of the world in order to actually bridge gaps and make more understanding of the world.
But actually, I didn't get an answer on my question.
Which is?
Sorry for that, because I have this friend, and he always shares some news on Facebook. And actually, he's always with some weird United States blogs running around. It's very, very conspiracy-like. And I always write him as a comment under his, look at this, it's a totally different view. And he's always like, oh, where did you find this? And I said, it was on whatever, CNN or whatever. It's the news, it's the world news. And he's like, I haven't seen this, because he's only stuck into Facebook. So as a journalist, that's a depressing view on it. I mean, he doesn't have the time to look something else up. So what's the strategy to get those people back to a bigger view? What do you think?
There will be always people that want to see what they like only, okay? And I'll take your friend as an example. He's talking about the United States, and suppose in the American elections something extraordinary happened that makes it breaking or rolling news. It's continuous news event that okay, the election day itself. How do you follow the development on calculating the results in different states? Do you see it live on television, or you see snaps of it on Facebook that actually talking about Trump only or Hillary Clinton only? The habit of people watching, I see something very interesting that I like as a breaking news on Syria, on social media. And then if it is breaking or rolling or continuous, then I'll go to someone who will give me breaking or rolling news, not bits and pieces from one point of view. So people actually in their daily life move from one platform to the other. They might not notice it, but it happens. And in my strategy, I'll have to make all my platforms complementary to each other.
Oksana doesn't agree.
Well, not that I don't agree. I think, again, our discussion revolves around the same points. It's obviously very important to invest in social media, and I think everybody present here is doing that. And to your earlier point, Peter, about money that that it all depends on the funding. Our social media team is 20 people, and we are #1 channel on the web. We just secured the Webby Award, leaving CNN, New York Times, and all others behind. It's 20 people. And salaries in Russia are not that high, much lower than in Germany, so you can calculate the budget of that effort. I think underneath that, and I'm not disputing, again, the need to come up with new ways of bringing your news to the audience, reaching out to new audiences, but at the end of the day, what is at the base is still the content. And the reason why, for example, our model is so successful is because you have to offer people alternative points of view. It's not because we have taken it as a mission, as an ideological, though in some ways it is an ideological mission for Russia. But I think it makes sense from the business point of view, because the current news market is still dominated by certain conceptions, certain points of view, certain vantage points that audiences around the world are growing increasingly tired of. I think we have never been able to reach so many people if they were simply not fed up with the kind of coverage that we are talking about. And I do say that with all due respect to my colleagues, but I do think that there is a tendency of projecting that kind of reporting under the guise of being objective and not recognizing the limits of it. And once you recognize the limits of it, you will be more successful. Seriously, it's just a matter of diversity. And going back to your original point, which I think is very critical, I don't have the time to figure out what is happening. You have to bring it to me on the plate. It's the same discussion as about faith and atheism. This is my sort of life path. I've experimented with many religions now. I think I can call myself an atheist. And this is, at the end of the day, you decide whether you want one book to give you all the rules how you have to live without figuring out it for yourself. Certain people do that, and I'm married to a Muslim. I have many Christian friends, Protestant friends, and this is how they live. I don't judge them. But if you believe that you have to figure it out for yourself, if you have to understand, if you believe that it is important for you as a citizen of the world, as a citizen in a democratic society who really knows what is going on in the world, in your country, then you have to do that intellectual work yourself. There is no way around it. You cannot outsource it to anyone else.
Do you agree?
I share your concern about the sort of silo mentality of many. I mean, I think that it's very easy for you. I mean, maybe this says something about me, but I mean, when the whole debate was raging about gay marriage, I mean, and the vote in Ireland happened, my Facebook feed was overwhelmingly, isn't this brilliant, and this is fantastic and stuff. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, I must have very specific set of friends, So on those, so I would worry about kind of, as that sort of conversation moves away from Facebook into the sort of dark webs of chat apps and WhatsApp and stuff, do people get a little bit more siloed in there? I wish I had the magic answer of how to break into that. I mean, I think that, that's the challenge that most journalists will face right now, is to just kind of put alternative views to people who like to lock themselves into those sort of little silos. I mean, I think probably the sort of best way is, A, to carry on with good journalism that resonates. I think sometimes around big stories, you have an opportunity to show that you do journalism around breaking news, for example, and around polarizing stories like Paris, for example, where it was very easy to go sort of like, oh, look at the bad guys who are bombing, and not quite understanding the complexities. And on those stories, sometimes you can break into those circles slowly by posting up, onto those social feeds. But I mean, I think that all feeds into, the whole sort of conversation about how do people want to consume their news and how do they get them. And I mean, we were here to talk about sort of television news, I mean, which is kind of, changing a lot. And the web is providing all these, different elements for people. But I think, I mean, on the whole, I agree that this is a very, very tricky area, and it's even trickier as it moves into a more closed part of the social webs, So I think...
Peter, what is your strategy to reach those people who can't be reached within, just on Facebook or just on...
Well,
there must be a strategy.
I'm not so pessimistic. I mean, you can't, first of all, force people to get some other information if they don't want. If they're happy, they're happy. And first of all, the consumers of international broadcasters normally are interested in other opinions. I mean, it's whatever we do, we are quite in a niche. So we're not mass media. We are for specific people who are either interested in democracy or interested in freedom of speech or interested in other opinions or interested in the world. So they have a broader spectrum. So I don't have any fear that the normal consumer, my target group, is only ignorant and dull and looking into the tablet or whatever and just to want to see their own world. So, but we have to be very radical in how we offer our content into Facebook, for instance, and into mobile devices. So we have to change the way we produce. We have to change the way we think. In the way we produce content doesn't mean that we forget our mission, but we have to be more nearer to the guys who use Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat or whatever. So this would be the task for us, I think for everybody sitting here, to get this straight. But I'm not so pessimistic because our audience, and there's luckily around the world there are also a lot of people watching or listening to Deutsche Welle or reading it. So they're used to having something which is balanced information, and they rely on us. So I'm not so pessimistic what concerns this one.
Does the change of production also change the way you set the agenda? Does it change the way you look on topics?
No. You have to be, first of all, Deutsche Welle always have to be balanced, have to be an advocate for the freedom of speech. So this will never change. But you have to be quite straight on how to address your target group. And so for us all is the problem that the way of spreading the news and the distribution has grown. There's so many possibilities now. So we have to be on every platform. We have to be on every social media platform. We have to be on every satellite still. So it is quite a target for us, a difficult target, but we all have to find the right way. And I think we're already doing it, and sometimes more successful with some products, sometimes less. But we have to be also, as a public broadcaster, we have to be more creative in, say, let's try something, and maybe just, if it doesn't work, we don't do it anymore. So we're getting on doing this at Deutsche Welle, and then hopefully with good success.
Peter, you just said you were maybe a little late on social media stuff, but you're coming up now. Sala, once in an interview, you told the interviewer guy, compared to the old BBC, Al Jazeera is a speedboat, willing to take risks and therefore much faster. What do you think? How huge is the demand on being fast in this world?
I think that's an old interview, I think.
That's an old interview, it's about. It was just after you changed from BBC to Al Jazeera.
I'll give you the background of that. There is a motto in the BBC which says, better late than sorry. And CNN used to be very fast. But I would say that you have to be first, and you cannot be first by not being accurate. So you have to be both. Speed and accuracy work together, and you cannot be the first or the leading without having the speed and accuracy. So it's not the speed on the account of accuracy or bias or whatever. The two go together. If you are not accurate, you are out of the game. If you are not fast, you are out of the game. So that's what it means. Yeah.
You want to say something, you guys?
Well, I mean, again, from the practical perspective, there is a tendency among the journalistic crowd to have to pay these respects to, accuracy and being balanced. I give you a concrete example. A bomb goes off in Brussels. The revolution happens in Ukraine. There is no way you can afford to be accurate because you simply don't have people on the ground. You have to figure out what is going on. Before you send people there, it's going to be 2-3 days. No network does it. So by the very nature of the job, what we are calling accuracy is a concept that I don't think is really operationalized. It still relies on your editorial policy. There's no way you can figure out what is going on in Brussels, but you already have to report on that. That's the nature of the job. So I think
But you could say there's a bomb, and I don't know nothing about it.
How do you even know that it is a bomb and not, let's say, some gas explosion?
But isn't accuracy all about transparency as well? You can very well sit there and say, we have reports on this is what's coming, we haven't verified this, we're just giving you the narrative of what's going on, because that's part of journalism, is to tell the stories.
That's a critical thing, but this is not something that most international networks do. This is what I'm arguing for. We are giving you the narrative, the Russian narrative, and what you're saying, we are giving you the accurate truth. That's the difference between us. Everything I'm calling is to recognize.
There's a difference. We're giving you what we know at that given time. We're giving you what we know, and we're being open about that we don't know everything.
Most international networks, especially CNN, they report from the first person. They never presaged or,
Maybe we take another example, not the bomb. Let's take, for instance, a German-Russian girl being possibly raped in Berlin. This is also an example where maybe accuracy would be quite good.
Yeah, and this is where the reporter said on several occasions, if you actually go back to the original story on the Russian TV, I know that this is a big thing in this current environment. He said on many occasions in that report, according to the relatives, according to the members of the community, they told us he never reported from the first person. And when it was translated into Germany, all those references somehow miraculously disappeared. So speaking about accuracy, you have to be very careful and not trust any single media because of their national affiliation. You have to do that work yourself.
In this special case, everybody should have asked every stakeholder, for example, the police. Is there any questions? We have two or three questions left. If you have any questions for the people on stage, there is no questions, and this is good because the time is over. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure meeting you guys.
Thank you.
Oksana, Peter, Inga, and Sala. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.